Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to another Saturday episode, and if you are a beginner gardener, this is the video for you. Let's jump into it and not waste any time. If you are a beginner gardener, there's a few things that you need to know, and these are things that I wish that someone had told me when I was beginning my garden journey. So these are my list of 10 items that I wish that I had known, and somebody shouted from the rooftop for me. So here's the video that needed to be out for me 5 years ago, and I hope it helps you. Let's get into it with number one. The first thing on my list is getting to know your growing zone. And that is so important because that's going to help you understand what you can and cannot grow in your garden. And I will tell you right now, I lost a lot of plants because I grew something outside of my growing zone, and I still to this day try to push it, but now I know if the plant dies, it's not 100% my fault. So your growing zone is very, very important. There's the USDA growing zones, and they grow through zones 1 through 13. It's a pretty large range, and they go in 10-degree increments. And then there is zones 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, 3A, 3B, and so on up to 13. And those go in 5-degree increments. And what that tells you is your cold temperature. It gives you no other information except for how cold you get on average. And it's over a 10-year period. And if you don't know your growing zone, all you need to do is you need to just go to Google and you say, what is my growing zone? And then your zip code. And it will tell you what your growing zone is. And it's very important that you know that, just to help you understand what's going to happen in your garden. And all it does is give you that very low temperature. It gives you no other information, your 10-year average cold. If you are on the western of the United States, you can look up your sunset growing zone. This is what I try to go by more often than not because that gives a broader range of things. What the sunset growing zone does is it looks up your humidity, it looks up your cold, it looks up your heat, it looks up your daylight hours, it goes over a whole bunch of things. And I wish that the sunset zone was the standard for the United States because what it does is it really breaks you into more microclimates. I'm a zone 9 in my sunset zone, so it's very easy for me to remember which one I am. But it takes into account a lot more things. So there's plants that are out there that say zone 7, but I can grow them because they grow in my sunset zone 9. And so I try to take the USDA growing zones with a grain of salt. So if you're in California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Idaho, parts of Colorado, and some zones extending into Montana, Wyoming, and even Texas, you are on the sunset growing list. So you can look it up. Just same thing, what is my sunset growing zone? And then your zip code, and that will pop that out for you if you're in one of those states. So check that out. That's going to just give you a better range of plants that you can grow, and it's going to help you really understand your climate because it breaks it down into more of a microclimate. And the second item that's on my list is water. And you need to figure out if you're going to be using irrigation, if you're going to be using sprinklers, if you're going to be doing hand watering, if you're going to be relying on the rain. What is your plan for irrigation? And this is something that I wish that I had done when we first moved to the property because I had to hand water everything, and I quickly realized 1 year into it that that was not the case for me. So we moved to overhead sprinklers. We did a fan sprinkler, and that's what everything got. And it's not the best for plants. Plants really don't prefer overhead watering from city water. They love rainwater, but we are very hot and very dry here, so it's off the table for me. So we rely on irrigation, and it's really nice. I have tubing that runs through my entire garden, and it means that I can individually choose how much water goes to each plant. So I have emitters that come out every 12 inches, and then if a plant is extra thirsty, I can go in and I can add extra emitters and I can give that plant extra water that it needs. So very important to figure out your irrigation, and that's going to give you the best success in your garden. It's just a lot of work, and it's usually a good amount of money to set up your irrigation, but it is so worth it because that means that if you need to take off for a couple days, you can. Your garden will be fine. If you have to hand water everything, you really can't take off during the peak growing season. So I highly recommend looking into irrigation rather than having to look into hand watering everything. It's a pain. It's a lot of work, but it's so worth it. The next item that is on my list is fertilizer, and this is something that I hated spending money on when I first started gardening, but it is something that is so important. I think that fertilizer, it sounded like a gimmick. I was like, this is stupid, my plants don't need fertilizer, and I didn't fertilize anything, and everything grew, and it grew fine. But then I started fertilizing, and the way my plants behaved was insane. It was a totally different plant. And so fertilizing is so important in your garden. When I plant almost everything, I go in with a slow release fertilizer, and then throughout the growing season, I usually twice a year I go in and I will give a little feeding to most plants, and then anything that's an annual, which we will talk about in a minute, so anything that's in a container really, I do go in once a week and I do try to feed it with a water-soluble fertilizer. So I go through a lot of fertilizer on our property, and it is something that is so important. Don't skip it. Your plants need to eat. They're trying to push out all of this growth, and if all of a sudden they take up all the nutrients out of the ground, they're going to be starved. They're hungry. They're growing like weeds during the growing season. So you have to feed them. They're very, very hungry plants. So make sure you don't miss fertilizer this year. Okay, number 4 is talking about annuals. And we're going to go over number 4 and 5 kind of at the same time. And it is annuals and perennials. So this is something that I was so confused on. It just confused me. I didn't understand it. I thought when I went to the nursery and I bought a plant and I planted it, it should live. But at the end of the growing season, it would die. And I thought that I didn't know what I was doing, and I was heartbroken. So knowing the difference between an annual and a perennial is very important, because an annual, it does its job. It grows during that growing season, and then it dies at the end of the season. And that is it for the plant. Versus a perennial, you plant it, it dies back, and then it comes back the next year. And I didn't understand the difference between the two, and I was very, very confused about it. So you go to the little nurseries and it'll say annual, and it's got these beautiful flowers, and you're like, oh my gosh, I want that in my garden. Well, you're going to take it home and you're going to plant it, and then a frost is going to come at the very end of the season and it's going to die. And that's okay. That's what it's supposed to do. It did its job. If you want something that comes back every single year, plant more perennials than anything. But I always think it's so important to do a combination of annuals and perennials. The annuals put out so much color, and they're so vigorous, and they usually put on so much growth in a very, very short period of time, that the impact that you get from annuals I think is so important to have in your garden. So definitely add some annuals, but don't blow your entire garden budget just on annuals because they're pretty, because you're going to blow that same budget every single year. So I recommend starting out with some annuals, but really invest in the perennials. They're usually about twice the price, and so that is the bummer. And you think, well, I like this one, and this one's cheaper, and this one has a lot more flowers than this one has. But I'm telling you right now, it's the upfront investment of you get this one plant and you will have it for 10, 15 years versus having it for one season. So annuals, they die back, and that's it. Once a year, you have to replant every single year. Like the annual ball, you've got to start all over once it's over. And then perennial means permanent. They're there for life. The next item that is on my list is figuring out sun in your garden. This is something that I did not understand. I would look in my garden and I'd be like, yep, that's shade, or yep, that's full sun. And that was not always the case, because sunlight moves throughout the day. So you need to keep an eye on what's happening throughout the growing season and what's happening throughout the day. You know, go check it in the morning, go check it a couple hours later, go check it 2 hours later, 2 hours later, 2 hours later, until you understand if that area is full sun, part sun, or full shade. And what that means is full sun is 6 hours plus of full direct sun. Then there is part sun, which is 3 to 6 hours of full sun. And then there's shade, which is anything less than 3 hours of sun. So there's 3 different categories, and then there is sun to part sun, and there's shade to part shade plants, which means that they can handle a little bit of both. And so finding plants for the right areas in your garden is super important. I didn't understand what that meant, and I would look in my garden and I'm like, well, I'm planting it at this moment and it's in shade, and it's a shade plant. Why is it dead? Well, because in 2 hours it's in full sun and it's going to get 6 hours of sun. So that is something that is very important, is looking at your garden and figuring out how much sun each area gets. And it could be where you could have a shade plant right next to a full sun plant, because at some point that shade has to stop. So figuring out where your lines are in your garden and how the sun works is super important, and it took me way too many years to figure that out. I would go through and I would plant a hosta and it would burn and it would die because I didn't pay attention. So the next item is learning your plant tag, and I've got one right here, and this is a hosta right here, and this is a great example of a plant tag to learn. So you can see it says part shade to shade on it, and that was something that I did not pay attention to. And in my growing zone, this needs full shade. So it needs less than 3 hours of sun, and really it needs 0 sun on it in my growing zone. Our sun's way too hot here. It's too intense. And so I only plant these where they do not get any sun on them. They just get full shade, maybe a little tiny bit of dappled sunlight, and that is it for these guys. But learning a plant tag is so important. So this is going to tell you how big your plant's going to get. This is going to tell you the sun requirements for it. It's going to give you all kinds of information on the back of this plant tag. It's going to tell you if it's resistant to any type of animal, deer, if it's resistant to rabbits, all of those things, which are so important. This is hardy zones 3 through 9. It gets about 17 inches tall, and it gives you your features, it gives you care. It says hostas grow best in moist, well-drained, organically enriched, and full to part shade. Clean away the dead foliage after frost to prevent insect problems. And this is one that's going to die back all the way to the ground, and you're like, my hosta, it's dead. What did I do? It'll come back next year. So this is a perennial, and it says it on the very bottom of this tag right here. It says perennial for you, so you know what you're getting. So make sure you look at your plant tags to figure out what you're getting. And I think plant tags have so much information on them, and so it's very important to understand what you're getting, whether it's a perennial, an annual, a shrub, an evergreen. Just look at your plant tag, do some research. I will say that sometimes on things that are a perennial or things that are a shrub or a tree, they will give you a certain size, but what happens is these companies, they will grow the plants and they'll grow them for a number of years. They'll grow them for 5-10 years, and the 10-year average on that plant is set to hit about this. But what will happen is they will order all their plant tags and they'll ship out their plant tags with those plants, and then they'll get to year 8, 9, 10, and all of a sudden the plant just like skyrockets and takes off. And so now that plant tag information is wrong because they only trialed it for 8 to 10 years. And the plant tag is giving you a 10-year average size, and so then it might be wrong. So if you have any questions, your best bet is to look it up on the company's website. That's usually the most up-to-date information because they can update in real time. Whereas plant tags, if they've already ordered thousands of plant tags, they can't just go back and update these. They have to reorder, and some of these plant tags have already gone out to nurseries, and so getting them reordered and getting brand new ones is kind of a pain. So look on companies' websites if you want to double check, especially for any types of trees and shrubs. I think that that's very important, is to just double check on the website because that's going to have the most up-to-date information. The next item on my list is mulch, and this is something that is so important to do, and I think every new gardener needs to understand that they need to be mulching. Your garden is young and there's a lot of bare soil, and that's going to help keep in moisture, helping your plants thrive in your garden. It's also going to help suppress weed seeds, which is things you don't want to deal with. You don't want to deal with weeds all season long, and you want to make sure your plants stay nice and hydrated during the growing season. So putting down just a thin layer of mulch, even if it's ½ an inch of mulch, the recommended mulch size is about 2 inches. You really want a nice deep layer. I never do that. It's too much mulch for me. I can't get behind it. But that's what's recommended, is about 2 inches of mulch. And so I usually go in with like ½ inch of mulch, and it really helps with the weeds and it helps with moisture control in my garden. I really prefer a more fine mulch. I don't want the mulch to scream at me in the garden. So there's the dyed mulch, the red and the black. And I really think that now you're giving your mulch a time to shine rather than giving your plants time to shine. And I will tell you, when we first started out, everyone bought red mulch. And so that's what I bought, was red mulch. And I put it in my garden and I was like, wow, that is really loud. And I can't see anything else. I can't see any of the plants that I just put in my garden. All I'm seeing is red mulch. And so I recommend finding something that is a more natural mulch. I use the Garden Time Pathway mulch. You can get it at Home Depot and Lowe's. I usually find the best price at Lowe's. This year I'm going to be going to a soil yard, and I'm going to be bulk ordering mulch because you can usually get the best price on it. You can order it by like ½ a yard if you need to. So look at bulk ordering if you can, or buy some bagged mulch, but buy stuff that's a little bit more fine, because then it'll break down by the end of the growing season, rather than having those big, huge chunks of dyed mulch or barky mulch that don't break down, and then by the end of the season you just have random pieces of bark laying on top of your soil and it looks a little messy. I prefer the more clean, natural look. I mean, personal preference, but I think that the clean, natural look is more beautiful in a garden, and it lets your plants really shine. The next item that is on my list, number 9, is to invest in good tools. And this is something I wish that I had done early on in my garden, because once I did it, I was like, there is no turning back to having good tools. I was always buying everything from the Dollar Tree or as cheap as I possibly could, and they would break and I would have to buy another pair, and then they would break and I would have to buy another pair, or they would only last like a week before they got dull or started having issues, and it was just such a headache. But I couldn't justify spending $30 to $70, $100 on a pair of pruners. I did end up buying myself, I think it was like $45 for a pair of pruners, and they're the best pruners I've ever had. I do not lose them. They have not broke. I bought them 4 years ago. They were an investment into me in the garden, and I love them. They are my Felco number 5s, and they're my best pruners. I do buy some cheap ones. I buy the Corona AG 4940 snips, and I love those. They're great little snips. I think they're like $12 or something like that. For a snip, it's very expensive. You can get snips for $1 from the Dollar Tree. So for snips, they're expensive, but I think at $12, I think I have like 4 or 5 of them lying around the garden, and I have them scattered in certain areas, so that way wherever I go in the garden, I've got them. So investing in some good garden tools is so worth it, and something that I wish that I had done earlier. I feel like people talk about good garden tools and they don't talk about the why. In the long run, you really are going to save money, and you're going to save a lot of a headache investing in good garden tools. I'm not saying go out and buy them all right now, but go out and buy one this year, and then next year buy a good rake, and then the next year buy a good shovel. Slowly build up your collection of good garden tools, and you will be so happy that you did. And the last thing that I wish people had told me was, do not be afraid to take out plants in your garden. If they don't bring you joy, they've got to go, and it is okay. You can post them on Facebook. Somebody will come and get it. You can even post, hey, I've got these plants. If somebody wants to come and dig them, they're yours. And guess what? Somebody will come and dig them up. And if nobody wants them, there's a reason nobody wants them. Throw them away. It's okay. This is your permission to take things out of your garden and just remove it. If it doesn't bring you joy, it's gotta go. I have bought a plant that I thought, this plant is going to bring me so much joy before. And then I plant it and I give it a year. I'm like, I hate this plant. And I've been scared to remove it. And I've been mostly scared to remove it because I post my videos socially and for people to see. Everyone, it's there for the public, and people have hot opinions about whether you should take a plant out or not. But I'm telling you right now, it's your garden. Do what you want in your garden. If it does not bring you joy, it needs to go. It should not be in your garden. You should be able to walk around your garden and feel joy everywhere you go in it. And if one plant makes it so you don't want to go over to another area, or if it's taking up real estate in your garden that you could plant something that really does bring you joy, it's not worth it. It's not worth having. The amount of good that you're doing in your garden by planting all of these plants outweighs you putting a plant in, hating it, and then removing it. And it's okay. So this is your permission to take out any plants that do not bring you joy in your garden. So that, my friends, is all that I have for you. I hope that you enjoyed this video on beginner tips for gardeners, things that I wish that I had known in my garden before I started. So thank you guys for visiting our garden. If you enjoyed it, make sure you hit thumbs up and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye, guys.